Hello everyone, this is Christian Maldexiton Interactive, and in this video we are going to have a change of pace of instead of dealing with just user-side code or front-end code, we're going to ask to do a little bit of work on the server in the form of starting to deal with the model state, and we'll see just what I mean by the model state here in a little bit. As usual, you can find a link to the article for this video in the description below, and let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is go into Visual Studio here, bring up the notes. One day I'll have everything set up before I start the video instead of having to scroll around. Let's go into, first we're going to modify our base HTTP service. So I'm going to source, services, and the HTTP service. Reason why we're going to go into here is that we have set it up so that we can perform a GET request, but we are now going to need a post, be able to post a request, and for cases like the login and register. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to scroll down here, and we're going to ignore these little red squigglies here. At this point in time, I think this is probably a resharper error with the cache. This is usually when I go, I don't even care to deal with this thing, and then open up Visual Studio Code. But we're only going to be in here for a very, very short amount of time here, so we're just going to ignore it. Like I said, what we're doing here is creating a post method. So post is going to take exactly the same information that GET took. So we have the URL, data that we're going to send in, the success function, error function, and finally, possibly the finally function. And then what we're going to do down here is this do promise, then this HTTP instead of get, of course, we're doing post, passing in basically the same information, the URL, the data, and this request option, so that it puts in the appropriate headers. We just do our success, error, and finally, we'll save that. And like I said, that's all we're basically going to be doing in this file, so we're going to close that so I don't have to look at that error message anymore and get any more annoyed. So let's go to now the components folder, authenticator, and we're going to modify the authenticator-http service. So in here, like I said, we're going to need it for both login and register, but for now, since we're just trying to set up the processing of model state errors, we're just going to do it for one, and that'll be for login. So let's make a public login method. We'll say equals, and what I'm going to do now is scroll back up to the top here. What we want to do is create an interface. So I'm going to export interface. I think I called it ILoginPayload. This will be the interface that tells us what type of data we need to send for a login request. We'll need a password, which will be a string. We need remember me, which is a boolean. And we need a username, which is also a string. So in login here, it's basically, let me just copy this. It's basically the exact same thing as check username availability, in the sense that we need all of the functions, but instead of having this username, we'll just say data ILoginPayload, or it could be payload, I guess. And then we just say this .post, and we need the URL, so that's authenticator HTTP service.login URL. We need the data, which is the data there, and then it's just copy and pasting here, error, and finally. So as far as those are concerned, I think that will do it for now. We'll have to come back later. So that takes care of though being able to make a login request. Next thing that I'm going to do is to go into the authenticator.component.ts file. We have a method now, I think maybe from the last video, the on-click button method, where we did something if it was the reset key, reset button that was pressed. Now we need to have the send key. So we'll do case this dot button send key, and inside of here we'll say this dot on click and send. Of course, we need to make that method. We'll come down here and make this private on click send. And in the on click send method, all we're going to do is separate out whether it's a a register request or a login request. We'll say if this dot is login, then we'll call the method this dot login, which we need to make. Put this in alphabetical order, and we'll have private login. Oops. And this is a pretty simple thing here. We'll just say this dot authenticator HTTP service dot login. First thing that we want to pass into this is the data. We'll leave it blank for a moment. Then we'll need a success function and an error function. I'm going to guess that I made a mistake again here. Looks like it. We go back into the authenticator.http service. If I copied the information from check username availability, for at least for now in the login, I'm going to say finally is going to have, it's going to be optional to say finally. We'll deal with that later. All right, so now it's telling us we need to actually send some information with our data. And in this case, we need a password. And that's just this dot control password dot value. We need a remember me, and this dot control remember me dot value, and username. Username control username dot value. Hopefully give that a second. Goes away. Beautiful. So now we're going to send this information to the server. We need a way of retrieving that information from the HTTP request and passing it into the C# code. So we're going to do that by first going up to our web UI. I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm going to right click on web UI, choose add new folder. Folder that we're going to create is going to be called models. Inside of that models folder, I'm going to add, so right click, add new folder, and we're going to call that account. So now we have that account folder made. Right click it, choose add new class. Class that I'm going to make is account login request. So I generally make the names for these type of things, the controller name account, the action name login, and request is telling me that this thing is coming into the controller action. Let's get rid of these namespaces that we don't need, because I think I need a couple of them eventually. And we'll just mimic the information that's being sent to us. So we need a public string called a password. We need a prop, a bool in this case, for remember me, and a prop, come on, string, and this one's username. Perfect. Go ahead and save that. If we go into the pages folder now, in the account folder, we have the login.cshtml. What we want is actually the model for us, the login.cshtml.cs class. We'll open that. I'm going to clean up these namespaces as well. And what we'll do here is now we have the onGet method. What we need to create is a public void onPost. So onPost is going to take in the account login request that we just created. And so we'll have the request. Perfect. And what I want to do, we did the same thing on the check username availability. Let's just use thread. So we import the using the system.threading namespace. We'll do thread.sleep sleep for 2000 milliseconds, just to slow things down a little bit. And to see that we can have error responses from it, we'll just say if and request.username. If that's equal to 3A's, for instance, then we're going to return new bad request object result. Let's just return the request. And then we'll return public void. It's not a void. It's going to return IAction result. And then finally, we'll say return new OK object result. We'll send in the request. I like to start by sending back the request so that we can see that the model binder is actually working correctly. Save that. And we're going to rebuild. Go back to the browser here. See, I know we all wanted to go back to the time where we had to push refresh on the browser. Of course, we have to refresh since we've rebuilt. Give it a second here to come up, and good to go. Great. Let's send in some stuff. Network. So 200 response. So we sent in some information here, and what we're looking at here is we're getting sent back to us. The password is null and the username is null. So we do in fact have a problem with the model binder. But while we're here, let's just check, making sure everything's working as far as giving us, and it's not username, AAA. Why you didn't give me? Oh, I'm an idiot. So we're having a problem with the model binding in the beginning. How am I going to get 3A's if I can't bind anything to the request in the first place? Okay, but we can change that or fix that real quick. Actually, we have to fix it right here. We do that by just adding an annotation to the request. So we'll put in our square brackets, and inside here, let's say from body. So we're telling the model binder where to find the information to bind to the request. I'm going to save that, rebuild, go back to the browser, refresh. And give it a second here. Come in, make our same stuff, leave and check, remember me, send it. So we look in the headers, we're sending some stuff, and we're getting some stuff back. That looks good. Do our 3A's, send that along. And that response comes back a 400. So bad request. So now we have everything. You know, the model binder is binding the information from the request to our request object. So now we'll come back in and start dealing with model errors, model state errors. And the way that we do that, for the most part, and we'll have to do it separately for something else, but for the most part, we come in here to our model, the request object, and we're going to add some annotations to the properties. So for now, we're just going to add one to the username. We'll come down here, we'll put in our square brackets. One we're going to use is called string length. And that one's located in the system.componentModel.data annotations namespace. And the formatting for this thing is we pass in what is the max value. So in our case, 100. Next, we set the error message. We'll come back to that in a second. And then at the end here, we're going to set the minimum length. And I think for us is 8. So now we work on the error message. So what we'll say is and we'll use the template variable here, the curly braces and the 0. So what will happen is it'll use the name of the parameter, so the username. So it'll say the username, and we'll say must be at least, put our curly braces in a 2, so we get the minimum length. So it must be at least minimum length, and at max, put in 1 to get our max length, and characters long. So it'll just say the username must be at least 8 and at max 100 characters long. You can change that to be whatever you want. And so that one's done. Let's go back into our login.cshtml file. Since we're now getting the ability to check for the model state, what we're going to do is remove this requirement in the if statement, and we're going to turn that to be ModelState.isValid, and if that's equal to false, then we'll respond with a bad request. But we're also going to change this. The object that we're going to send in for the bad request is going to be an anonymous object, and inside there we're going to say it's going to have a property called errors. That's just going to be the model state, and I'm going to put a property on it called type, and it'll be a string which says model state. We're going to use that type later on to automate the process of dealing with the different errors so that our service is going to know what type of response it's dealing with. And I think we'll leave basically everything else the same. We'll save that, rebuild, go back to the browser and refresh. And now that we're back, we'll do the same thing here. It's going to check to make sure that it's 8 long. So let's send that in. So we have a 200 response, still getting sent back the information that we sent in. So that's good. Now let's come back up here, give it something less than 8 characters long, send that in. We've got a 400 response, sent it in, and what we're getting returned back is this stuff. Now, the model state obviously has a bunch more parameters and things on it that we are not necessarily interested in sending back to the client side. So what we're going to do is now deal with modifying what we send back, basically. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And to do this, what I'm going to do is create an extension method here. So what I'm going to do, go down to Visual, or the Explorer here, and I'm going to go to Web UI and create another folder. So right click, add new folder. I'm going to call it extensions. And inside that, now I'm going to create a class. So add new class. And I called that one, cleverly enough, Model State Extensions. So this class is just going to hold extension methods, so we're going to make it static. Come down here and create our first one. It's public, static, it's an IEnumerable. I just want the enumerable in system.collections and errors. This will pass in the model state dictionary. So model state. Let me clean up the namespaces. Come down here, we'll say return. So model state, we'll convert the model state to a dictionary using link. So if it doesn't do it automatically for you, we need to import the system.link namespace. And now to create this, what we're going to do is we'll take the key. So the key that's on our model state, we'll just have the, we'll just use the same key. And now the values, oops, what we want is x.value.errors. And we're going to project the errors. All we are interested in is the message from it. So we'll just do .select. We use another variable and error message. So that'll create us a dictionary for that. I don't remember why, but since I have it in here, I'm going to keep it. I have a following where statement. And in this case, we want to say value.any and save that, right? So we're taking the model state, converting it to a dictionary. Each entry will use the key from the model state as the key to the dictionary, and then its value for that associated with that key will simply be the errors for it projected into just the string. All right, so let's save that. We'll return back to the login.cshtml.cs, and so instead of sending a model state, we'll say dot errors. And if it doesn't do it for you, of course, we have to bring in the webui.extensions namespace, save it, rebuild. Oh, build's fine. Go back to the browser, refresh. Now that we're back here, what we'll do is just send in, well, let's send in stuff. Let's get a good thing, make sure everything's still working correctly. So 200, send in something bad. Get our response and check the preview. So now we can see the response is a little bit better. We have an errors our property. It's an array, and that array of it's an array of objects. Each object has a property called key, and then value, and the value is an array of strings. All right. And actually, just to see that that's an array of strings, I wanted to modify this one thing or a little bit up here so we can see it. Let's just throw in some errors here. We can see that the key is, of course, going to be the name of the property that had the error. So I'm just going to throw in some additional errors for the username and one for the password. We're going to rebuild. Again, once again, go back to the browser, refresh. Come on. Put in just 3, send that in. Bad response. And we'll see that we have this array of string values for the username, meaning the errors. So now let's start dealing with processing those errors. And once again, we will return to the services folder. We need the HTTP service. Once again, we're going to close our eyes to that error down there. What I'm going to do is, or what I want to do is automate the processing of those model errors. So to start with, I'm going to create a few interfaces. So I'm going to say export interface, and it's an error response. And I talked about it before that response is going to contain the string. In this particular case, it's a string saying model state. Next, we're going to have export interface. This one's an model state error. Key, which is a string, and value, which is the string array. And finally, we'll have export interface, and this one will be model state error response, and it's going to extend the error response. So in addition to having the type, it's also going to give us the property that's errors, and those errors are model state error array. All right, so let's come down here, create us a private field. So private, we'll say model state errors. Model state error array starts off null. Let's make a public get state errors just to return those. Perfect. Now in the catch process here, we're going to put inside this function, we're going to say this dot process error, and we're going to pass in the response. Let's go down and make this method private process error response. Do some stuff with this thing now. I don't actually think that the response, I think that Angular is always going to generate a response. It's whether or not, well, it must generate the response, right? It's going to tell us whether it's status codes and all that. So we won't necessarily need to check for the response. So what we'll do is we'll say const JSON equals response.json. That's an I error response. Now this thing, I think that if we don't send anything down, if we just send down the status code, then this thing could be undefined. So we'll say if type of JSON equals undefined. We'll even do the if or JSON equals null, then we'll just return. Otherwise, we will make a switch, and we'll do it on JSON.type. We'll have a case of model state. Perfect, and then we'll just say this model state errors is equal to, we'll put a couple of parentheses there, JSON as I model state error response. So we'll take the errors from it. Save that. Now we can get rid of the offending error. We'll just close that file, and we'll go back to the authenticator.component.ts file. And in the error side of things, on the login, all we'll do is say console.log this.authenticator HTTP service.model state errors. So this will just make sure that we are actually processing those errors correctly, and then they'll display it within the console. Let's go back to our browser again. We're going to need to make another request here. Let's make 3, something in there. We'll even do that. So we've got our request down there, and we're seeing the preview, so the response. So we have the information in the response. We look to the console, and we're actually getting that same information being displayed within the console. So we're getting the model state error response from the server. Our base HTTP service is sort of processing it and giving us access to the errors in our authenticator.component.ts file. All right, so that part, at least we're done with that. One thing we're going to do to clean things up a little bit is that if we go back to the login.cshtml.cs file, this process of, if the model state is invalid, do this thing here, return bad request object, that's something we're going to do quite frequently. So let's make it easier on us to do it. We'll return to the ModelState Extensions.cs file. Let's create us another extension. We'll call this public static. It's going to be an I action result. And we'll just say, we'll call it bad request. It'll be this model state dictionary, model state. And the thing, all we're going to do actually is this. And lowercase. Okay, so it's the exact same thing we were doing before. We've just encapsulated it in another method. Let's save that. So instead of doing this, we can now just say return modelstate.badRequest. This way we do not have to worry about creating this right property names. We don't have to come up with the right string. It'll just always be that. So let's go ahead and save it. Looks like it did the build for me anyway, but let's rebuild. Go back here and we will refresh one more time. At least one more time for this video. And we're back. All we really want to check is to make sure that we're still receiving the information that we were before, and of course we are. Right? So we have the exact same information that we had previously, just showing us the errors. Right? So I think that will take care of it for this video. I think in the next video we'll work on using this information and displaying it to the user, what was the error that happened for that particular input. Thank you for taking the time to watch our video. I know that your time is valuable. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and click the thumbs up button, as well as share the video with your friends. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. And once again, thank you, and I will talk to you in the next video.